Suicide. Among the youth of today, in the advent of social media, late-stage capitalism, and the mounting pressure of modern youth culture, that involving bullying, cliques, alienation, victimization, identity crisis, sexuality confusion, substance abuse, and the inevitable existential crisis associated with all of the above, and of course adding on top of that, rising educational requirements, expensive rent, and insecure jobs. And that's not even going into COVID-19 and its subsequent demolition of social interaction as well as the global economy. The point is, youth suicide is a serious problem, and it is currently on the rise globally. But while all developed nations are struggling with this issue, Japan stands out above the others, as youth suicide there has been trending upwards to what is now threatening to become epidemic levels, to the extent that it is the leading cause of death between the ages of 9 and 19, according to the latest reports in 2020. Now, if my intro hit you as hard as Truck could, it's not just because he's going ham on this season's Isekai quota. It's because most probably you or someone you know has experienced the trauma of losing a friend or loved one to suicide, and some of you may have even considered or attempted it yourself. Being someone who is close friends with members of the veteran community, and as someone who has struggled with mental health, both my own and those close to me, I can understand that this subject is a tough one. In fact, the death of the young, regardless of circumstance, is hard, let alone those due to suicide. So if you don't want to go further, that's completely okay, but I really want to make something clear. This show, while confronting, is incredible. And if you can somehow force yourself through that pain to watch, it may just turn out to be an experience you will treasure. It may only be 6 episodes in, but as far as I'm concerned, I am convinced this show is worth your time. To the extent that I wrote half this script at work in between clients and on my breaks in a flurry of inspiration. There is magic here, and a level of heart that in my mind propels this show to my #1 new show of the season, beating out the new show Horimiya, one of the most popular ever manga, and the best rom-com since Kaguya. So without further ado, let's talk about this new show. But before we do my standard deep dive, I want to gush about the typical anime stuff. I want to talk about Wonder Egg Priority. What grabbed me initially and got me to click watch now on my streaming application Anime Lab was Ai Otto, our heroine. Her look grabbed me immediately, with the heterochromic eyes and a smile that makes me melt in a way that, were I an ice cap, Al Gore would have a panic attack. Her overall look is outstanding, and her colour palette is a masterpiece of character design. It captures the entire premise of the show and its nuances just by itself. The very conscious use of blue and yellow symbolising depression and happiness, waging an endless war for dominance over the soul of this lovable little goofball. Just look at her hoodie with the sunflower. It's such an innocent and happy outfit, yet with the hood up and her eyes downcast, it looks like the crumbling facade of someone living a lie. A girl who wants to retreat into her shell and shut everything and everyone out. All that you could ever want to know about her is right there in front of you. She is a recluse, a target of bullying, a night owl who prefers to wander alone or be with animals rather than spend time with other people. And yet we can feel just how empathetic she is. Hell, in the very first scene of the show, we see her bury a dead cicada and offer a prayer to the gods for its soul. This is an insect, one that is usually considered an annoyance, and yet she feels an overwhelming sense of compassion and a duty of decency. So when the main plot starts, her earnestness and drive to help is apparent from the get-go, as the chaotic nightmare sequences throw us and her into a fight for survival. Yet she would never ever consider giving up on the people she fights for. And all those little details add up. They add up to build the picture of Ai Otto. You can see her, you can feel her, she is a real person. And what's insane is that this same care and attention to detail is given to all the characters we meet in the show, both the supporting cast and the episode-specific ones. You can just tell a lot about each one of them just by looking at their design. It's brilliant. But while all of these design decisions are genius, what's even better is the art style and the animation. As many have pointed out, it's gorgeous. Its level of polish is ridiculous. It's very reminiscent of a top-tier KyoAni production, and if you were to point a gun at my head and demand I guess which studio this was without any knowledge or context, I would have probably guessed KyoAni, given that they are my favourite studio, though it's probably just bias on my part, as I said, this show is astonishingly, painfully gorgeous. Almost impossibly so. The lighting and the background art are just incredible, and during the strange trip between worlds and the dream sequences and the clever merging of realities, they're all just masterfully done. I mean, Studio Cloverworks is a newer studio after they separated from A1 Pictures, yet they have been churning out some absolute fucking bangers. Bunny Girl Senpai, Promise Neverland. They collaborated with Trigger in making Darling in the Franxx, even though the ending of that was quite exciting. And now, this season, they made Wonder Egg Priority and Horimiya. And Horimiya, as I said before, was looking like the hit of the season for me. Not anymore. Man, I don't know where they've been hiding this animation team, but they've decided that they want to fucking flex. And in their doing so, my decision for best show of 2021 so far is not even close. Not even close. As for the music, the opening has this beautiful sense of nostalgia and sadness. It is in fact a rendition of a graduation song sung by Japanese high school students, which actually featured in an episode of Nichijou. It's a song about remembering times past while bidding farewell to their classmates and teachers, all the while looking towards the future. An appropriate song for a show about defeating mental trauma and depression by fighting for a better tomorrow. The rest of the OST is a very good accompaniment to the action as well as for setting the tone, but unfortunately I haven't really noticed any standout tracks yet that I could listen to by itself, which I honestly expect to change as the series goes on and ramps up. But every show has its weaker points, and if its only weakness is having an above average set of music instead of truly excellent music, if that has to be the show's weakness, I'll fucking take it, man. It's just... Just on a technical level, this show is fantastic, and this is a good point where if my friend Callie, my editor, has done a good enough job picking clips, that should have already sold the show to you. Stop the video and fuck off and go watch it right now. However, in any case, if you still haven't been sold on the show, let's talk about it some more. So let's talk about the substance to the show, because while all the aforementioned stuff that I've been gushing about is important, it's not what makes this show a masterpiece in the making. Like Hollywood movies and supermodels, you can be as pretty and well put together as you want to be, but if there's no substance behind it, all you have is a shallow spectacle, not a work of art. And it is in this depth that Wonder Egg Priority shines, and given that we are only halfway through, the fact that it's showing this amount of polish and quality just in its opening phase is flat out incredible. I won't discuss the story much because this show is best taken in blind, one episode at a time. As I said just before, Callie's clip selection and my praise should have already sent you to watch it by now. But if you need more convincing or you want an analysis because the show confuses the fuck out of you, I sympathize with you, and I'm here to oblige. Because the concept of this show is a stroke of unmitigated genius. Flat out, it just is. But if I may break from the anime reverie just a minute, I need to explain why it's so important. We need to appreciate just how groundbreaking this is contextually. Because as a piece of popular media made in Japan, this show hits harder than you might think. As I mentioned in the opening of this video, suicide, especially among its youth, is an epidemic in Japan. But suicide is an outcome, it's a result. It is a symptom of a problem. Except in extreme cases, there is almost always a catalyst or cause for suicide, which, when extrapolated over a wider context, leads us to the conclusion that there must be an underlying social condition that causes it. Yet, touching on social ills, especially ones of this nature, are not something Japanese society does easily. Japan's culture is hyper-conservative and has a rigid socio-economic hierarchy, and that does not lend itself well to addressing societal problems, let alone actually taking action to fix said problems. Japanese society has a tendency to brush things under the rug or hide things in the closet if they don't reflect well on important persons or the country itself. In fact, by complete accident in writing this script, the closet metaphor is doubly meaningful, as LGBT people in Japan make up a substantial component of the aforementioned youth suicide rate. It was only until recently, in fact, that Tokyo Prefecture made anti-discrimination laws protecting the rights of LGBT people, and it still hasn't got any codified law covering the country as a whole. And the primary motivator for that was the large influx of foreigners expected due to the Olympics, which was stopped for reasons. Yeah, they were afraid that foreigners may see Japan in a negative light should such measures not be in place. Yeah, it was to please foreigners and to make Japan look good that they took these steps, rather than taking a proactive step to protect a large number of its citizens from discriminatory treatment and social alienation. Looking at the statistics, it's quite painful to read. LGBT people in Japan are 1.5 times more likely to be refused employment due to their sexuality, while 45% of Japanese responded that they would be unaccepting of their child's decision to openly identify as an LGBT person. But most of all, the biggest impact of being a young LGBT person in Japan who is either suspected of being gay or willingly out, or trans, or any other of the LGBT pronouns, it is actually something that affects almost all Japanese school students. Bullying, which is something this show definitely touches on. In one study conducted over the 2019 fiscal year, Japanese schools reported no less than 619,000 cases of bullying that were severe enough to be addressed by the faculty and in an official capacity. That's not including bullying of a subtle nature, such as exclusion, alienation, or minor cases of bullying. Now keep in mind what I said about Japan's conformist and collectivist nature. Culturally speaking, Japan and the Japanese tends to go along with authority. They tend to sort of stick to the status quo. They let it all happen because this is the naturally accepted order of things. Then consider how we in the West react to bullying. Generally speaking, we report it more often, but a lot of the time we don't report due to a fear of retaliation and the fact that people in general, communities in general, hate a snitch. So if we in the so-called rebellious liberal West don't report anything, I feel it would be safe to assume that the level of unreported bullying incidents in Japan would probably be much higher. In fact, think back to every single high school drama and anime you've ever watched. I'd wager that bullying, rumor spreading, exclusionary behavior, and social hierarchy is featured in 90% of them. And while this is not unique to Japan by any means, bullying happens everywhere, it's just a natural part of school life. I myself was bullied quite often throughout my school life, in fact. And yet, I never had "go kill yourself" graffitied all over my locker, or had garbage stuffed into my desk, or had my stuff, thrown in the bin and set on fire, or been brutally kicked to the curb while walking home by a group of laughing kids. Not saying it doesn't happen, but you see the instances of bullying in Japanese media, anime, manga, and live action. And even to us here in the West, we're kind of like, fuck, good God, that's a bit far, isn't it? It's just such a common occurrence in Japanese high school media. It really does signify a serious problem, and the stats that I could find from official studies seem to corroborate that fact, that bullying has been sharply rising both in occurrence and intensity in Japanese schools over the past 2 decades. And all of these issues that I've mentioned are all on top of what is already an incredibly stressful environment for young people. Academic pressure in Asian countries in general is flat out absurd, but in Japan it is again taken to an extreme. In fact, it is one of the primary contributors to the suicide epidemic, according to a study by the University of Hokkaido, which found that 1 in 4 secondary students in Japan suffer from depression and aggravated stress, most of which is directly related to social relations at school and academic pressure. And when entering the workforce, new employees start at the very bottom, like they are at the very bottom rung. Now, this is normal in every society, but you see, with Japan's cultural obsession with hierarchy, it means that new workers will often work in excess of 60 hours a week for less wages than most other developed nations. The only country which has a worse track record of this is, of course, surprise surprise, the United States of America. In our own anime industry, in fact, it is especially chronic, with most of the workforce being very young and criminally underpaid. It's gotten to such an extreme, people have actually died from the stress, and doctors in Japan have actually formed a term for death by overwork, karoshi, which some suicides actually fall under officially. And like I said at the start of this video, all of this is on top of the standard issues teenagers face regarding sexual identity, body image, cliques, all that stuff I mentioned, all of this is on top of it. And so, when you take all of this information into account and combine it with the fact that Japan is conservative and slow to change, with those inside the system very rarely, if ever, showing overt opposition to the status quo, then consider that there is a much lower stigma around suicide in Japan, with ritual suicide practiced by the military parts of the communities still practiced until the 20th century. You then have the context to why this show is so special. The author of this series, Shinji Nojima, has basically kicked in the door of this discussion and tossed in a truth grenade, which detonates with an apocalyptic thunderclap. Wonder Egg Priority is a bombshell on this topic. Wonder Egg Priority addresses all the issues I've listed in their own episodes, and with the fact that this show is about young women, it is also foreshadowing the constant and inherent misogyny in such a conservative society, especially in regards to sexual assault. In fact, it's already had an episode with a discussion on the topic how in some cases, young women in Japan are told, unironically, for the sake of professional security, that they should learn to accept sexual assault and deal with it as though it were normal and unavoidable. And while other shows have tackled all these issues independently, which I've covered in an hour-long video that you can watch here, This show hits them all at once. It hits every one of these issues all at once, and it does it in such an incredible way. And what makes it truly incredible is how the show frames it. It's how it frames these discussions and how these traumas are overcome. You see, I and the other girls in this show are all struggling with their own inner demons and incredible amounts of trauma, most of which is due to someone close to them taking their own life. They each have their own unique reasons as to why this is so important, which I won't spoil for you. But their objective is to save the souls of their lost friends and to understand why they did what they did, as well as to fight and conquer their own demons. In Ai's case, the story is, in a way, very reminiscent of Violet Evergarden, in the sense that each trauma that she helps someone else to overcome adds context to her own trauma, which she can then use to deal with it. So how to save the souls of their lost friends? How do they go about doing this? Well, I and the others have been given a task by what I can only assume are Angels of Death, or some equivalent. This task is carried out every night when the girls go to sleep and enter their dreams. And in their dreams, they enter the world between worlds. And in this limbo, the lost souls of girls who have committed suicide are hunted down by the inner demons which cause them to take their own life. These personal traumas are given monstrous physical forms, reminiscent of one's worst nightmares. Our hero's mission is to fight these monsters as well as the little creepy gremlins pursuing them, fighting on until they ultimately vanquish the root cause of the lost soul's trauma, bringing them peacefully to the afterlife. And each soul they save brings them closer to saving the souls of those they lost. What gives the show its name is the fact that while the characters are awake, or at least in the transition phase to sleep, they purchase eggs from a gacha machine, which contain the lost souls that they need to ferry to the afterlife. And upon falling asleep, they shatter the egg, which brings the lost soul to life and begins their mission to save them. You know, it's interesting actually. When I thought about it closely, what Ai and her comrades are, is they are ferrymen, or ferry women in this case. In Greek mythology, one could only pass to the afterlife by crossing the river Styx into Hades. To cross the river meant taking the ferry, manned by Charon, guardian of the underworld. And so people who are buried with coins over their eyes, and in later eras, money is placed into the deceased person's pockets. The reason this was done was to pay the ferryman for passage to the afterlife. Even today in some cultures this myth exists tangentially in other forms. In Norse mythology, Valhalla is simply a different realm, as is Hell, which is where we actually get the English word for the underworld, Hell. It's from Norse mythology. And to get to Valhalla, or to be ferried to Hell, you have intermediaries, Valkyries, demons, etc. Japan has a very similar myth as well. Heaven and Hell are different places, they are different planes of existence, but they are actually physically connected to the realm of the living, and passages to these realms usually requires a spiritual intermediary. Those spiritual intermediaries being a girl like Ai. Ai is the ferry woman paying for their passage to the next life. She deposits money into the machine and grabs an egg and takes charge of that egg to save the soul of the young girl inside. In fact, I believe Ai pays for the eggs with a 5 yen coin, which is auspicious as in Japan, the 5 yen coin is considered lucky, as to wish someone good luck in Japanese is goen, which sounds similar to 5 yen in Japanese, go yen. And so it's often used for shrine offerings, or it's auspicious and good luck to carry one around, just keeping it on you all the time. It's common to have a 5 yen coin just for luck. In fact, I keep one in my wallet. It was actually sent to me by a little shop in Akihabara when I bought something from them online, and they wrote a note to me in broken English thanking me for my patronage, and they enclosed a 5 yen coin as a symbol of good luck. I was touched by that, to say the least, and I still carry it with me. In any case, this framing device we are given combines with insanely awesome action sequences and gives us incredibly emotional personal moments. And it takes a huge deep dive into a topic which all of us around the world, but especially Japan, are struggling with. It's confronting, it's dark, and some moments are truly excruciating. But when it comes to something to the culmination point, it's just truly beautiful. And it will help give voice to the emotions of people who can't speak up for themselves, or for people who can only make their point through a tragic and irreversible decision. You need to see this. We all need to see this. If nothing else, it will help us understand others and ourselves. And really, this video feels as though it was a long rambling rant, and to be honest it was. But I just need to convey to you 2 things. 1, check on your friends. Look after each other. If you see something wrong with your mates, ask them. Buddy checks, my friends. Buddy checks. Never be afraid to ask your mates if they're alright. And the second is the purpose of this video. You've listened to me for too long already. Piss off. Video's over. My second message is, watch Wonder Egg Priority. I've been Posadas Pac-Man. This has been the editing of Comrade Calliope from my friends at Weeb Revolution, and the graphic design of Ancom Aesthetics, my main man Crypto. See you guys later. Stay safe out there.